So there's a new Toy Story movie coming out this week. I will admit I was very happy with the way that Toy Story 3 ended, and I didn't really think that a fourth movie would be necessary, but seeing the trailers for the new movie and seeing a few early reviews, I'm actually pretty optimistic about it. So I thought that before the new film comes out, I should go back and look at the original 3 movies. I hold the Toy Story movies incredibly close to my heart, and the first 2 movies I'd probably say are within my top 5 favourite movies of all time. The first film was one of the first movies I ever watched alongside many of the original Disney classics. As a kid I was fascinated by the idea of toys coming to life when you left the room and used to always imagine the same thing was happening to me. Growing up I loved the bright colours, the comedy and just the basic idea of the film, and now as I get older I've grown to appreciate all the little parts of the film. I'm sure everyone's seen the movies and know the story, but I'll go over them anyway. Toy Story revolves around a young boy called Andy. While Andy isn't in his room, his toys come to life and interact with each other. The toys are led by a cowboy called Woody, played by Tom Hanks. Woody is Andy's favourite toy and is loved by all the other toys. Due to Andy moving to a new house, the toys are alerted to the fact that Andy's birthday party has been moved forward a week. At this party, Andy is given a Buzz Lightyear toy, played by Tim Allen, a space ranger who is unaware that he is just a toy and believes himself to be the real Buzz Lightyear. Buzz quickly becomes Andy's favourite toy and becomes the most popular within the group of toys, leading Woody to become incredibly jealous. One day Woody pushes Buzz out a window since Andy is only allowed to take one toy with him to a family outing to Pizza Planet. Andy is forced to take Woody, however on their way Buzz fights Woody, leading to them being stranded. After this the two have to work together to be reunited with Andy and to put their differences behind each other. In a lot of ways the film has this subtle message about jealousy between siblings when a newborn is brought into the world, kind of like the plot to the Rugrats movie with less sacrificing to monkeys. It's a great message to give to children, it's one that I think the film handles really well. The film is incredibly original and full of imagination, helping it stand out and making it still to this day one of the most creative animated movies ever made. PIXAR proved right from the get-go that they are a studio full of originality and imagination, something that they have actually kind of forgotten in the last decade after shoveling out sequels and prequels to us non-stop. Watching this film, there is never a point where you feel like you're just watching a computer-generated image. You feel like you're watching real characters interacting with each other. This isn't just due to the fantastic writing, but also the voice acting, which is all incredible. Tom Hanks and Tim Allen both give 2 of the best performances of their careers as they completely transform into these characters while also injecting some of their own personality into it. In all 3 movies, the actors actually filmed their lines together, and you can definitely tell because there's this chemistry between them that very few animated characters really have. Their performances are equally heartwarming, emotional, and incredibly funny. This is a film that is hilarious no matter what age you are. It's not like some animated movies that are only funny if you're a very young child. The humour and writing transcends ages, and that's something that at their best PIXAR always managed to do. They make movies that appeal to all audiences, movies that aren't just made as a cheap distraction for children, but made as something that sticks with anyone that watches it. And that's exactly what the original Toy Story does perfectly. The animation may not look quite as great now as it did 25 years ago, but it was incredibly revolutionary at the time. Some 3D animated movies focus on throwing in loads of detail and unnecessary bits that they forget that at the end of the day, if the characters are well fleshed out, it doesn't matter how the film looks. And even if the animation in this film isn't perfect, the characters are so entertaining to watch and the designs are so unique that it never becomes a big problem. The designs are fantastic, really making the most of their premise. Scenes like the scene in which Woody gives an announcement to the other toys and the scene later on with Sid's demonic Satan toys are both absolutely great. These are 2 very contrasting scenes in tone, with the first being very bright and the other one being pretty dark and almost scary. And I think the vibrancy and the darkness that they show perfectly sums up the film's design strengths. The final act of the film has a genuine almost Star Wars / Indiana Jones style sense of adventure and just how exciting, heartwarming and fun it is. You're constantly on the edge of your seat rooting for the characters. Scenes like this are directed perfectly and would be expanded upon really well on the sequels to emphasize the feeling of adventure even more. Toy Story is one of the most important movies ever made, bringing 3D animation to the big screen, which was in many ways a blessing and a curse because the boundaries of animation were pushed higher, but also the art of 2D animation kind of died off or was just left to low budget TV shows. But despite this, it's a film that lives up to the hype of how revolutionary it was. I honestly think this film was one of the most perfectly constructed films ever made, and possibly my favourite animated movie ever alongside the second film. I give it 10 3D animated movies that really should never have been made out of 10. Sequels are incredibly hard things to do. It's kind of hard to take what you did well previously and improve upon them while also creating something that stands on its own. Well, Toy Story 2 is not only one of the rare sequels that manages to do this, but it's also possibly one of the best sequels ever made. The sequel took a long time to develop and there were a lot of issues making it. Whether it was the film simply not working or the assets almost being completely deleted accidentally, the film was a troublesome process which even ended up with a third of the animators ending up with RSI. But the final film is proof that hard work really does pay off. The film opens up with one of my favourite opening action scenes in any film. It's incredibly simple, but it works perfectly because it's not only fun, but it expands the mythology of the Buzz Lightyear character. I think it's a perfect way to start the film. Plot-wise, once again, I'm sure everyone knows it, but I'll go through it anyway. Just before Andy goes away to cowboy camp, he accidentally rips Woody's arm. Instead of taking him with him, his mum puts him on the top shelf where all Andy's discarded toys go. Up there he finds Wheezy, a penguin who was put up on the shelf when his squeaker broke months prior. Andy's mum comes up and empties much of the top shelf into a box for a yard sale. Woody then tries to rescue Wheezy but ends up stranded on the floor. Here he is found by an insane collector known as Al, who has been looking for Woody to complete his collection of toys from the show Woody's Roundup. Al steals Woody and takes him back to his collection, which also includes the cowgirl Jessie, played by Joan Cusack, Bullseye the horse, and Stinky Pete the prospector, played by Kelsey Grammer. Jessie and the prospector introduce Woody to his past and show him all the merchandise that Al owns. The scene where Woody plays with the bubble blower and a turntable is honestly one of my favourite scenes in the film. There's something about that scene that always stuck with me as a child, and it made me want to own every single piece of Woody merchandise that I could. As Woody starts to settle into the idea of being with this new family of toys, Buzz and the other toys are operating a rescue mission to get him back to Andy before he returns from cowboy camp. There are very few sequels in which I can break down every single point of what I liked about the first film and see that every single one of those points were improved massively. The writing here maintains the sense of originality and imagination of the original while also embracing movie tropes and pop culture references. This is shown in the opening scene, which is almost like a parody of sci-fi action movies like Star Wars, and there's this section also in the scene that plays also Sprach Zarathustra, I can't pronounce that, but the song from 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's also a fantastic scene later on which basically parodies the I'm Your Father scene from The Empire Strikes Back, which honestly makes me laugh every time I see it. The cool thing about the film being based around toys is that the writers can give them huge backstories without it ever feeling out of place, because they essentially are satirizing the sort of things that toys would be based on. So getting to see things like the Buzz Lightyear space shooter game at the beginning, or the whole idea of the 60s cowboy puppet show, adds this incredible depth to the universe and the characters. I love the idea of having this whole franchise that Woody emerged from instead of just having him as the generic cowboy toy character. And by making him a vintage toy kept in the family before even Andy has this huge wave of importance to the character. The new characters are equally as fleshed out, especially Jessie, who has a deep backstory about how her owner abandoned her when she grew up. This is shown through a musical montage which is easily one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking moments in the whole series. I cannot watch this film without getting choked up at this part. The film takes the action/adventure of the final act of the first movie and essentially expands it into an entire movie. The scenes with Buzz and the other toys making their way to Al's toy barn to rescue Woody are constantly exciting, well paced, and full of some really fun set pieces, such as the scene with them crossing the roads under the traffic cones. And the final act of the film is just fantastic from start to finish. Similar to the first film, the animation hasn't aged perfectly, but honestly this film still looks pretty damn amazing. They nailed the look of the toys in this film and everyone looks so realistic. The backgrounds and sets all look beautiful as well. The only times the film looks a little bit off are during scenes of the human characters and when Andy's dog appears. They still hadn't quite nailed human characters or animal textures and fur, something that they of course absolutely perfected and pioneered with Monsters Inc. a couple years later. Toy Story 2, similar to its predecessor, is just a near perfect movie with some incredible animation, fantastic writing, voice acting that is some of the best ever put to film, and an extreme sense of adventure that led to it being one of the most entertaining movies of the 90s. I give it 10 bad Disney sequels out of 10. Toy Story 3 was a rumoured film for years following the release of the second movie. I used to hear things about it being made all the time, but after a while I just kind of thought it was going to be one of those sequels that gets heavily rumoured about and just never gets made. When the film finally came out, I turned 13, so I wasn't really watching animated movies anymore. I was watching horror movies and teen sex comedies, things that I thought were super mature but really were just made for teenagers my age. But I always had a soft spot for PIXAR movies. I'd still watch films like Finding Nemo and The Incredibles regularly. I loved Up upon release, and the first two Toy Story movies were such a big part of my childhood, there was no way I was going to skip out on the third movie. Like the first two movies, it was critically acclaimed, however in my opinion, it's definitely the weakest of the trilogy. That's not to say it's bad, because it really isn't, but I do think it doesn't quite reach the heights of the first two movies. The film follows 17-year-old Andy, who is getting ready to leave for college. His toys have been laying in a toy box for years untouched. He decides to put them in the attic but take Woody away to college. However, in a mix-up, the toys accidentally get left out with the garbage. The toys escape and make their way into a donation box heading towards a daycare center called Sunnyside. While trying to get the toys to come back into the house, Woody is accidentally shut in the car and goes with them. When the toys get to Sunnyside, they are greeted by the other toys led by a bear called Lotso, played by Ned Beatty. The toys are told that at Sunnyside they are always played with, which brings them all joy, except for Woody, who is determined to get everyone to go back to Andy. Woody escapes to go back to Andy, however after crashing into a tree he is found by a little girl called Bonnie, who takes him back to her house. Meanwhile, it turns out that the toddlers at the preschool beat up the toys, leading Buzz to request that they get moved into the room with the bigger children. Lotso then resets Buzz to his factory settings and causes him to lock up the other toys into what is essentially a concentration camp. So the toys have to escape Lotso's grip and get Buzz back to normal, while Woody tries to get back to them and take them back to Andy. The first thing I'll say about this film is that it's incredibly dark. In fact, in many ways I think this film may be a bit too dark. I think especially the second half of the film is almost way too dark for a kids film, to the point where there are parts that can actually be pretty scary and parts that are so emotionally bleak that it rivals most adult dramas. Which kind of does make sense. The film was made with the mindset that the kids who saw the first two movies are going to be all grown up now. But I think the way they essentially make a super bleak prison break movie kind of takes away from a lot of the fun and brightness that the first two movies had. I go to Toy Story for a fun, exciting experience, and I walked away with something super melancholic and at times terrifying. However, despite all this, I still think the film is pretty damn good. If I separate myself from the fact that this is a film for kids, and if I try and pretend it's got nothing to do with the first two movies, then I definitely do enjoy the movie a lot more. The writing is very good, however I think there are way too many similarities between this film and the second movie. The second movie was very original and had almost nothing in common with the original movie, whereas this film is basically the same story but with a prison break aspect thrown in. And although throughout most of the film you never really think about its similarities, upon repeated viewings, especially when watching the two back to back, it's hard not to ignore the similarities in the films. Although the film can be incredibly dark, there's also a lot of really genuinely hilarious moments, including the Spanish Buzz section and the whole relationship between Ken and Barbie. Of course, what I think is the real reason the film works is how emotional it is. The film is basically about growing up and saying goodbye to your childhood, and the way that they tackle this by showing Andy reflecting on his childhood and passing the toys off at the end, it's incredibly powerful. Honestly, the best parts of the film are the first and last 10 minutes of the movie. They are the parts of the film which are absolutely beautiful and emotionally satisfying. I will fully admit that the final scene of the movie makes me cry harder than any other film every time I see it, just because the first two movies were such a big part of my childhood that the way they closed the chapter on the stories was just incredibly perfect and emotional. Of course, there are other things I really like about the film. It does keep much much of the adventure feel of the last movie, except it increases the tension and the stakes. There are a couple of action set pieces that are fantastic, including the incinerator scene towards the end. The voice acting is as top notch as it's ever been before, and I think Tom Hanks especially gives the best performance in the entire series in this film. The animation is just perfect in every single way. 3D animation was basically perfected into mid to late 2000s, so this film hasn't aged at all in the almost 9 years since its release. And yeah, I can't believe it's been that long. It feels like this film came out yesterday. Overall, I do like Toy Story 3 quite a bit. I think it's emotionally satisfying, has incredible animation and really great voice acting. However, due to just how dark the film actually is, I find myself going back to it way less than the first two movies. It makes me so miserable to watch, I just can't sit through it, whereas the first two movies fill me with pure childlike joy. I give it 8 terrifying monkeys out of 10. I honestly thought that the ending that they gave Toy Story 3 was perfect, but apparently Toy Story 4 gives the series yet another perfect ending. So I guess I'll just have to judge the film myself when it comes out in a few days. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you on the next collection review.